and it is preparing to live stream the meeting, and it's setting us up. And so let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's now 9:01. On our proposed agenda, I have some opening words before we approve the agenda. And what I wanted to do was go to the nomination hearings and Judge Jackson's comments about perseverance, because I think those are inspirational to all. And the context is she was a young student at Harvard, and the quote is, "I was really questioning, do I belong here? Can I make it in this environment? And I was walking through the yard in the evening, and a black woman I did not know was passing me on the sidewalk. And she looked at me, and I guess she knew how I was feeling, and she leaned over as we crossed and said, 'Persevere.'" And so her message to young people at the hearing was, I would tell them to persevere, and I would encourage each and every one of us as we come through what hopefully is appearing to be the end of the pandemic. I would encourage each and every one of us to also listen to the words of Judge Jackson and persevere. And so if we could now turn to the proposed agenda for today's PCO meeting. At this point, I would ask for a motion to approve the proposed agenda.
So moved.
And who was that?
John Lemus.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
Jack Donahue will
Second,
Jack
Lou.
Donahue will second it.
Okay,
Jack.
we've got Jack and Lou in a number. Any other questions or comments before we vote on the proposed agenda? And I'm going to be admitting one person, and then would the person who's calling in on the phone number ending in 5704 please identify themselves?
Hi, this is Yvette Joseph.
Hello, Yvette. Thank you for joining us, Yvette. I'm going to go ahead and rename you so that everybody knows who you are. And we will go ahead and mark you as in attendance. And welcome Blair as well.
Morning, David.
And so we have a pending motion to approve the agenda. There have been no comments or questions. All those in favor of approving the agenda as written, please say aye.
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 All opposed say no. And the agenda has been approved. Next, let's move on to the review of financial matters. That was sent earlier this week for those that might have wanted to study it. Also resent in this morning's email at 8:20 in the morning. We had both the financials as of last year, 2021. The third LD in 2021 chose to spend all its available money that's in the non-exempt account, which could be spent on candidates. So we got really, really low in that account balance. And from a year-to-date perspective, we currently have $388.87 in the what we call the progressive candidates account. The other account that the third LD has is the party building account, and we currently have $2,468 in that account. Year-to-date net income between the two is a whopping $24.21. And we have recurring expenses that the third LD's e-board in February approved for payment for the entire year. What has not been approved for payment is any expenses relating to contributions to candidates, because number one, we need to raise the money. for that. And number two, the third LD typically does not have the e-board approve the contributions to candidates. We typically do that by a vote of the PCOs at the same time as endorsement. Any questions on the financial report that was distributed both earlier in the week as well as of this morning? Okay, no questions appearing. We did have a question that came up this morning. If you wanted to give to the third LD, which account should you be giving to? And we do have two accounts that are both Act Blue accounts that are on the third LD website, thirdld.org, thirdld.org. The need right now is for the Progressive Candidates account. I think we have a fair amount of funds that are in the party building account, more than enough to keep us going for a couple of years in normal operations, so that if your personal budget permits, and you were inclined to make contributions, whether they be monthly or one time, it would be appreciated if they could be going into the Progressive Candidates account on the contribution page at thirdld.org. I'm going to defer the report of the chair, just because we may or may not have other business that needs to be done. I'll push that towards the end if we need to. We've got a hard cutoff today at 10 o'clock, and the hard cutoff is at that point in time we morph from being a PCO meeting to the 3rd Legislative District Caucus, where we're electing delegates to the state convention. And I simply want to make sure that we absolutely positively have the opportunity to get all the business that we may need to be done to get it done by 10 o'clock, so that when we hit that magic hour, we can immediately close the PCO meeting and open up the 3rd LD Legislative District Caucus. For those that recently joined us, we have 21 delegate positions available to be elected. We had 4 self-nominations through midnight of last night, and so that we have an additional 17 delegate slots that are available for self-nomination this morning from PCOs if they choose to do that, keeping in mind that the chairs, vice chairs, and state committee members of the LDs are automatic delegates. LDs and county are automatic delegates. So for example, in the 3rd LD, chair, vice chair, and the 2 state committee members are automatic delegates. The 6th LD chair and Yvette Joseph, the 6th LD state committee member, now reside in the 3rd LD or in voting members as PCOs of the 3rd LD. They're also automatic delegates to the state convention. They don't need to run for a delegate position. All 4 county officers are residing in the 3rd LD. So Carmela and John, who are on the call this morning, are already automatic delegates to the state convention. They do not need to run for a delegate position. And Andy, Marcus, and Tim, as our elected legislators from the 3rd LD, are also automatic delegates to the state convention. So if your name has not been mentioned, you're eligible to run for delegate. And so we'll be taking names of folks this morning that might be interested in running and adding them to the 4 names that were submitted overnight or through last night. And so let's go ahead and get to the item on the agenda, which is the opportunity to choose bylaws of either the existing 3rd LD or to adopt the bylaws of the 6th LD as the 3rd LD's bylaws. And so that may be a little bit confusing, so let's just walk through why we're doing that. The state party adopted redistricting rules that basically say if there's a lot of new PCOs from a different legislative district that come in to the redistricted 3rd LD, we need to give the body an opportunity to choose between the 2 sets of bylaws. And that magic threshold is more than a third. So being the accountant that I am, I went back, and out of our 51 precinct committee officers, we have more than a third of those 51 have come to us from the 6th LD. And therefore, as an agenda item at this meeting, this first meeting after redistricting has occurred, we have to have the opportunity to think about whether or not we should adopt the 6th LD bylaws. And everywhere it says 6th LD, we would simply change the name to 3rd LD. So we don't get to debate over the pros and cons of particular provisions. It's an all or nothing approach. We either take all of the 6th LD bylaws and everywhere it says 6th, we substitute the word 3rd. Or if we choose not to do that, then the 3rd LD bylaws, as they exist in their entirety, continue on. And so earlier this week, I sent out a copy of the 6th LD bylaws in their entirety. I sent out a copy of the 3rd LD bylaws in their entirety. And then I got a couple questions. So I thought I'd put together a summary of compare and contrast. And so that was sent out earlier this week. And it was also included, I believe, in the email this morning. And so anybody have any questions about why we're having this item on the agenda, why we have to have the opportunity? And because I'd like to answer those questions before I open the floor. So if there is a motion to adopt the 6th LD bylaws and it's seconded, we'll go ahead and have a robust debate on the pros and cons. If there is no motion, and there does not need to be a motion if that's what, unless somebody wants to make it, if there is no motion to adopt the 6th LD bylaws, then the 3rd LD bylaws will just continue automatically. So any questions before I ask the body as to whether or not we want to think about making a change?
I would like to ask Jack Donahue if he has read the 3rd and has any interest in the 6th being more appropriate.
Sure, and I can answer that question. I did, and I think, in my own personal opinion, I think, pardon me, I choked up. I think the most prominent differences I saw were that the 6th LD does not have voted representatives to the county E-Board. Our state committee members and our chair and vice chair are the only people who attend those county executive committee meetings. So that's a little bit of a difference, where the 3rd has 2 people who are elected as representatives to go in the stead of the chair and vice chair. I believe, David, is how you have it.
It's in chair of the state. Jack, it's in chair of the state in lieu of the state committee members. So the 3rd LD representatives to the county are the chair, vice chair, and the 2 elected county E-Board representatives.
Where the 6th does not have that. So that was a significant difference. The other is that in the 6th, we, a couple of years ago, opted to make our communications person a board level, executive board level person in the 6th, owing to what we thought the nature of the importance of social media and communications were. So Karen Mobley has been serving that role in the 6th for quite some time. So that's what I saw as the major differences. David, I would ask your personal opinion, what you think the major delta is between the two.
Yeah, I think also composition of the executive board, so that the executive board, voting members of the 6th LD executive board are the 4 elected officers. Other members, like the secretary, treasurer, communications chair, are on the executive board of the 6th, but are not voting members. Whereas in the 3rd, all 6 elected members plus the appointed secretary are voting members of the executive board. If there were a separate treasurer, which there is not, that treasurer, appointed treasurer, would also be a voted member. And as a chair, in the 3rd, I can't spend money without either the E-Board approving it or the PCOs approving it beforehand. Whereas in the 6th, the chair of the 6th can spend up to $500 on their own without the explicit approval required of either the body or the executive board. I don't know how it works in practice, but their bylaws do say the chair can spend up to $500, and in the 3rd, I can't spend a nickel without advance approval of either the E-Board or the body. And Rick, great question. Any other questions about differences? Carmela, your hand is up.
Thank you, David. I think with respect, another key difference between the 3rd Legislative District and the 6th Legislative District bylaws is that the 3rd Legislative District bylaws extend membership to any person residing within the 3rd Legislative District who identifies as a Democrat. And the 6th Legislative District extends membership only to precinct committee officers and elected officers who live within the boundaries of the 6th. I think that that difference between anybody identifying as a member being able to be, anybody identifying as a Democrat being able to be a member and having to be elected to be a member is pretty key as well. And just to give one specific example, on the county board, we have a member who is a DACA recipient. So he is legally here in the United States now, but he is not a citizen of the United States. He contributes to our party. He contributes to the city government. He's paying taxes. He's not being represented in elections outside the party, but he is a contributing member of our society, of our community, and to the Democratic Party. So I think procedural issues can be amended relatively easily if that's what we want to do later. But to me, the key distinction is that the 3rd Legislative District bylaws are more inclusive of more Democrats, and that the 6 LD bylaws exclude people who haven't been elected. And it appears from the preamble that they have to be, that people have to be US citizens in order to be elected PCOs in the 6th Legislative District. I also would note that the county bylaws say, and this is in line with the state bylaws, that any person residing, well, for the county bylaws, any person residing in Spokane County who identifies as a Democrat is a member of the Spokane County Democrats. They're not a voting member unless they're elected to office or appointed to office. So I'm in favor of the 3rd Legislative District bylaws because of that inclusiveness. Thank you.
And so, Elliot, before we go to you, I'll just, Carmel, I just want to add on some nuances. Where that change came in the 3rd LD and it's under, on the comparison as eligibility for officer, is any person residing in the LD may be an officer. That was changed in November of 2020. I believe in 2022, as a result of us discovering to our dismay that prior to that, the bylaws required that an officer be a registered voter in the 3rd LD, and that's why it was changed. And so, unfortunately, we can't change the voting membership rules in either of the LDs because the voting members require, membership requires that someone be an elected or appointed PCO. And under state law, elected or appointed PCOs must be registered to vote. But certainly, Mark Carlos, who is our state committee member, is eligible to vote as an e-board member, but under state law is not eligible to be a precinct committee officer. And so there are some interesting nuances that I think as a party we work through. And Elliot, with your permission, Carmela's got her hand back up again, so I'd like to ask her to briefly either rebut, if necessary, or enhance the remarks, and then we'll go to you, Elliot.
For your forbearance, and thank you, David, for the opportunity. I do have the amended 3rd LD bylaws, amended as of November 14th, 2020, that you made available to us. And I was speaking specifically about membership rather than voting members, and that membership the bylaws with respect to membership are more inclusive in the 3rd LD than they are in the 6th LD. And if I spoke too much to make that unclear, I apologize.
Oh, no, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, Carmela. Elliot, would you care to make some remarks?
Yeah, I think the important thing is that our meetings are open. They've always been open unless they go into an executive session during the meeting. So whether we say they're a member or they're just in the community, I don't think it makes a lot of difference. I'm really glad that Mark Carlos is participating, and whatever we need to do to keep that going, I think that's great. But it's really important that we have a tradition, a very strong tradition of having all of our meetings being open. That's it.
Thank you, Elliot. Any other questions or comments or concerns about about making sure that folks understand the differences between the third LD bylaws and the sixth LD bylaws? Any other questions or concerns? Okay, at this point, I am going to open the floor, keeping in mind that the third LD bylaws will continue automatically unless there is a motion to adopt the bylaws of the sixth legislative district for the third LD. I will entertain a motion at this point in time to adopt the sixth LD bylaws for the third LD if someone wishes to make that motion. There being no motion forthcoming, the bylaws of the third LD will continue through the next 10 years as they may be amended from time to time. Thank you so much, PCOs, for that discussion. We now have an opportunity under state party rules to consider whether any of the third LD officers who are not state committee members, whether there will be an election for that position at our May 14th meeting. So as I mentioned earlier, the state committee members, all, let's see, 176 of them continue automatically regardless of redistricting. So those positions are not eligible to have a new election for. But the chair in the third LD, the chair position, the vice chair position, and the two county representative positions are all eligible to have the body determine whether they want to have an election for all four positions, or you might want to have an election just for vice chair or for one or both or neither of the county positions. And so this is an opportunity for the body to basically have a fresh bite at the apple with respect to 4 of the 6 elected positions: chair, vice chair, county representative A, and county representative B. Our current chair is me. Our current vice chair is Patty Irvin. County representative A is currently John Lemus, and county representative B is currently Lily Navarrete. And the question is, does anyone wish to make a motion to cause an election for any or all of those positions to occur at the May 14th meeting, our next scheduled meeting? And at this point, I will hold the floor open for a motion for anybody who has an opinion as to whether or not an election should occur for chair, vice chair, county rep A, county rep B, any of those positions or all of those positions. So the floor is open for a potential motion. And Carmela, I see your hand has gone up.
Thank you, David. Yes, David, I don't have all of the information I need to drill into the details of attendance at county e-board meetings, but I understand that the third legislative district's representatives to the Spokane County Democrats e-board have not consistently participated. That one has, that John Lemus has, because John Lemus is attending those meetings in a couple of capacities, but that Lily has not been able to attend as frequently. Is that an accurate representation of the past year or so?
I believe that Lily has participated via proxy at one meeting and has not attended any other meetings either by proxy or in person. And John, as her seatmate, do you and as well as being county party vice chair, might you be able to talk about that issue?
That is correct. Lily had asked once for me to be her proxy. I did not see her at the last e-board meeting, and I did not hear from her about a proxy. Yeah.
And so I don't know if it's appropriate for me to speak as county chair, but as a PCO, if our legislative district is going to have representation on the county e-board, I would like us to find someone who will attend those meetings and contribute to quorum and to discussions at the county level e-board meeting.
And so, Carmela, from a process perspective, that would require that if you wish to make a change and cause an election, you would have to move to have an election for the position that you want to have an election for.
Thank you, David. I would like to move to have an election to for the second, I believe it's the second position on the county e-board.
And that would be county representative under
B.
terminology, that would be county representative B. And is there a second to that motion?
Second.
And who seconded?
Elliot Fabric.
Thank you, Elliot. There is a motion to have an election at the May 14th meeting for the position of County Representative B. Is there any discussion with respect to that motion? None appearing. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no. The motion has passed. And therefore, at the May 14th meeting, we will have an election for County Representative B position. And we will circulate that widely and ask for candidates, including the incumbent, to potentially self-nominate for that position. Are there any other positions that anyone would like to make a motion for an election at the May 14th meeting?
Dave, this is John Lemus. I would like to make a motion that we have an election for County Rep A. It doesn't make sense for me to fill two positions. And if we can get the County Rep A filled by someone within the FERD LD, it will definitely help the county e-board meet its quorum. So I make a motion that we have an election for County Rep A.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that motion.
That was Rick Galloway.
Yes.
Discussion. Hearing none, I'm going to take off my chair hat for a moment and put on my PCO hat for precinct 3220. John, I find your action proposed request to be selfless. And in the best interest of the county party, I commend you for that. and notwithstanding the fact that you are stepping down, potentially stepping down from that position as a result of the election, I know you're doing it for the goodness of the party, the best of the party, and encourage you to, you know, we're in the cycle where we will be reorganizing in December, and all the offices in the third LD will be open, and I will encourage you, open for election, and encourage you to run for that same position if that's what you choose to do so in December, or a different position. But I thank you for being selfless and doing something in the best interest of the county party, and which may be against your personal interests. So thank you for doing that. Any other discussion with respect to the motion to hold an election for the position of County Representative A at the May 14th meeting?
Yeah, I would just like to support what you said about John. And I would think that since it's his position and he's suggesting by his own motivation to change it, I can't imagine anyone doing against that. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Any other comments about the motion to cause an election for the County Representative A position at the May meeting?
Mr. Chair, I would also like to add to the accolades, just a little quick, folks. John, thank you for not only being part of our e-board here in the third as your state committee member, but also as your county secretary. Thank you for carrying our party through this fiscal era. So please stay here in the third because we do need you.
Thank you, State Committee Member Mark Carlos. Therefore, no further comments appearing. We'll now move to consideration of the motion to cause an election for County Party Representative A at the May meeting. All those in favor, please say the word aye.
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 All those against, say the word no. That motion has passed, and therefore both County Representative A and B positions we will hold an election for at the May meeting. We are now going to move on to the next item, which is contemplation of early endorsements. Early endorsement is before filing week has occurred. And the proposed agenda has that we would like to consider early endorsements of United States Senator Patty Murray, Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, and I had indicated in an email to PCOs this morning, or not this morning, but this past week, that I would also like to add to that the consideration of an early endorsement for Spokane County Auditor Vicki Dalton, who filed with the Public Disclosure Commission last week for re-election as Spokane County Auditor. And so the chair will entertain a motion to endorse Patty Murray, Steve Hobbs, and with the permission of the body, Vicki Dalton as well. And I see Karen Mobley actually waving a real hand as opposed to a virtual hand. So Karen, the chair requests for you to speak.
I move that we accept the motion, or that we, whatever we call that, we advance the suggested motion of the chair to endorse Hobbs, Patty Murray, and our friend Vicki Dalton. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
And who seconded?
Elliot Fabric.
Thank you, Elliot. Any further discussion with respect to the early endorsement before filing week of Patty Murray, Steve Hobbs, and Vicki Dalton? All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed say no. The motion has passed. I do realize, I just realized, you know, Marcus is at the bottom center of my screen and Tim is on another page. Marcus, of our 3 elected positions, is Andy up this year for election? He's in his off year, correct?
That's correct.
And you and Tim are up for election this year, correct?
Correct.
If the body were to wish to early endorse you, would you be willing to accept an early endorsement by the 3rd LD?
Most graciously, yes.
And Tim, if the body were to consider early endorsing you for re-election, would you accept an early endorsement?
Yes, graciously, as Marcus said.
And so now we need somebody simply to say, David, you forgot about Marcus and Tim. Let's have a motion to early endorse Marcus and Tim. You don't need to, in your motion, you don't need to put, David, you forgot about them. But if we could have a motion for early endorsement for those 2 representatives, that would be wonderful. Feel free to take yourself off mute and make a motion.
So, second.
And who was the mover?
Karen.
Karen Mobley.
And who was the second?
Mary Winkus.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Karen. Any discussion? Do we want to have a detailed and involved discussion about whether or not we want to endorse the re-election of Marcus and Tim?
I don't think any hand wringing is necessary.
I think Tim and Marcus are probably grateful for that. Feel free to, we're going to move to a vote now. So if you could take yourselves off mute, all those in favor of the early endorsement of Marcus and Tim for re-election, please say the word aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And anyone who chooses to vote no, please say the word no. The motion has passed.
You get an email? Are you going to go back in?
So at this point, we are now at the A status of the meeting where we have our next meeting, which is the Saturday, May 14th meeting. That meeting is designed from a conceptual perspective to consider, that's the Saturday before filing week opens up. That meeting is designed from a conceptual perspective to be in a situation where we are going to be thinking about endorsing people who have filed with the Public Disclosure Commission. And then we've got a potential special meeting 1 week later, just in case somebody files during filing week that we had not anticipated. And therefore, we have the opportunity to endorse them immediately after filing week so that they can choose to put our endorsement in the voter's guide, which has to be submitted almost immediately after filing week occurs. So that's the method behind the madness of having a stated meeting on May 14th and a special meeting on May 21st. It's basically to facilitate the ability for candidates to put their endorsements in the election guides for the voter pamphlet. And so that's the reason that we've got the timing for those meetings. With respect to good of the order, which is on the agenda as time permitting, we have up to 20 minutes of good of the order. We're not allowed under state party rules to start the legislative district caucus until 10 o'clock. So let's have plenty of good of the order. And if you do have a good of the order, please consider raising your hand, if possible, virtually in Zoom. I see Mark Carlos, and before I call on Mark to have some good of the order. I would also like, since we've got now 19 minutes left, I'd like Marcus and Tim to be thinking about being able to report back to us. I know you had a town hall, was it Thursday night? And if you could report back to us what you consider the personal highlights of the legislative session to be. And also, I'm afraid I'm going to ask you for your biggest disappointment from the legislative session as well, because I know from a short session perspective, short sessions are terrible because they don't allow a lot of time. So if we could ask Marcus and Tim after Mark Carlos and Kathy Gunderson to talk about highlights of the session and also biggest disappointments. And so Mark Carlos, please unmute yourself. And then after Mark will be Kathy Gunderson. If there are more folks that have go to the order type announcements, please raise your hand virtually. And otherwise we'll be going to Marcus and Tim for highlights and disappointments from the legislative session. So Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as your state committee member, I would like to formally thank PCO's Elliot Fabric and PCO's Carmela Conroy for their kind words earlier about inclusivity. As you know, I am the first DACA recipient to be on the state committee and also in the third legislative district. So I would like to also point out that we do have a bunch of refugees coming in who, you know, some of them are coming from Europe, some of them are coming from the westernized parts of Afghanistan. So I hope that this actually inspires them to be part of this democratic process, and also democratic with a big D also. But also I would like to formally welcome our friends from the 6th, because as we saw, a lot of them are actually here, like, you know, out of not of their free will, but also they're now here, like, you know, as our neighbors and as our compatriots. So I encourage them to actually run for positions when we reorganize, so that way we can have a full entire board that all of us are represented. So thank you. And also, I would be remiss without thanking formally Representatives Marcus Riccelli and Tim Ormsby for their work in the legislature this year, especially for East Central.
Thank you, Mark. Kathy Gunderson.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that people knew about the Workers' Memorial coming up on April 30th. That's usually celebrated closest to April 28th to commemorate all the people, to commemorate OSHA, which became law. And that's why it's even celebrated. And we name off all the people who died from work-related causes or injuries. And that's going to be happening at 11 o'clock at the city's Mission Park at the memorial, which is right on the Centennial Trail near the parking lot on Mission and Perry. So I encourage everybody to come, and it's a very short ceremony, and just to appreciate the fact that everybody deserves to not only go to work, but come home from work every day healthy and whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any other good of the orders before we ask Marcus and Tim? Oh, Kathy, if you could repeat the time of the event, date and time, that would be helpful. I know there's a question in chat on that.
That's April 30th at 11 o'clock.
Thank you so much. Marcus, do you and Tim have a preference as to who goes first?
I would, to the senior member, I would prefer of our delegation, actually.
Thanks, Marcus. I won't take that too personally. It was a very busy year. We knew that coming in. I think there was a substantial amount of one-time money that was either leftover federal relief money from last year, as well as a significant amount of taxable activity that occurred as a result of the stimulus and extended unemployment insurance benefits, putting money in people's pockets. We approached this session very much as we did the last one, that we were still in a crisis mode and focused on the essentials, the things that international aid organizations might be focused on when they go provide relief at a natural disaster, food, shelter, health, cash assistance, and opportunities for recovery. So this year, about of the excess, kind of the windfall, we were able to contribute more than $2.5 billion transportation package, which Marcus was one of the key developers of that, and he can go into a little more detail about what that means for Spokane. And we also transferred money to the capital budget, the construction budget that builds higher ed, K-12, and community projects throughout the state, which was a real shot in the arm for those budgets, which will create a lot of economic activity and employment opportunities for folks that will have good wages and benefits. I think for the investments out of the operating budget, beginning with those folks who we learned, it became very evident about who was left behind during the pandemic. Folks that were marginalized previously had it much worse off, and trying to focus getting resources in their hands so that the recovery was meaningful for them. And in order to do that, we realized we had to invest in people, trusted messengers within communities, to get the word out to folks that might be otherwise intimidated or unfamiliar with how they could access services that were available to them. And that's what the budget did. It's a very hefty document, but and has a lot of investments in it, but it is all about the people. It is about the people that we serve, and those investments in early learning, K-12 and higher ed and the education space were very substantial, as well as housing, behavioral health, healthcare. All of those things received very healthy shots in the arm. The biggest concern I had coming in, knowing that we had inflationary pressure and what the pandemic did about people reassessing whether they wanted to work and where they wanted to work and what they'd be willing to work for, was we have a lot of people that we rely on for delivering critical government services. And whether they're in supportive living, helping folks from the DD community, whether they're in skilled nursing facilities, taking care of our elders and infirmed folks, all throughout the spectrum, we're relying on these caregivers, and they're not the highest paid folks in the world. And we made a concerted effort to make sure that we were providing substantial wages by increasing vendor rates to those that we contract with that employ those individuals. I'll turn it over to Marcus, but to answer the question, David, about biggest disappointments, I spent nearly all of my time working on the budget as opposed to being in Caucus, learning about policy bills, and to a fault, I had to spend more time on the budget and not as much time as I would have liked or have normally been able to do on the policy side of things, and missed some opportunities to learn more, to be able to speak more knowledgeably and confidently about what those things were. I feel good about the budget, but I don't feel great about missing the opportunities to learn more and to be more involved in some of the critical policy stuff that was occurring this session. With that, I'll turn it over to Marcus.
Thanks, Tim. Let me first and foremost say, we are very lucky in our state of Washington, but in the 3rd district, to have Tim, who has a heart for our most vulnerable, leading the appropriations committee, and that's critical. He's very trusted. This is actually an amazing budget. He, Tim, doesn't care for the flash and stuff, but I'll back him up here. For a supplemental budget, we're making historic investments in a time when people really need it. He talked about the things were most important: responding to the most basic needs, providing, protecting housing, increasing our housing stock, providing food and assisting with utilities, investing in our K-12 system, expanding healthcare access and public health. So I think this is a real good move forward and builds upon, the $59 billion budget that we set last year when we actually came in with not knowing who was going to be the president, where the federal government was going, thinking that we were going to have to make cuts. So I think we need to make these investments. I think there's a lot of people that have still been left out, and we're working hard to address that. Tim mentioned, and I do want to speak a little bit, like one of the biggest things I think we did was a transportation package that doesn't raise gas taxes. Obviously that could have problems, with what's going on in the world with gas prices skyrocketing. We were able to make huge investments, over $3 billion in our preservation and maintenance. People out there want to see that infrastructure is not, critical infrastructure is supported and not failing. And so we make investments. But I think one of the biggest shifts in this investment is we were able to use over $5 billion of the Climate Commitment Act to really change how we do transportation and look at things like transit and multimodal efforts and electrification and reduce our carbon footprint. I'm particularly excited to have been part of that. I was part of over 90 listening sessions in over a year and a half, and there was a lot of times we didn't think we could move this package forward. We were able to do it. Something that sat on the Spokane Regional Transportation Council's list of priorities for over a decade, Division Bus Rapid Transit, we're investing $50 million in. That'll connect to the Central City line. That's access to so many jobs for folks where mobility could be an issue, and we're creating that access to jobs, and not just jobs, to get to healthcare appointments, to do important things. Some people, because of trying to reduce a carbon footprint, make transit a choice. For some folks, it's their only option. And so I'm really excited about that. It speeds up the North Spokane corridor, makes investments in bike and trail stuff, and does some great stuff around the East Central neighborhood, where we're trying to have a land bridge. And Council Member Wilkerson's been leading on that, Senator Billig, et cetera, a land bridge to connect a place that we, cut off historically, and reconnect the East Central neighborhood with the Sprague Business District. So that's good. As far as like local priorities, hopefully you're all subscribing to the newsletter that I put out. We'd like to try and recap that. So I don't want to go too far into it because I know we're closing in time, but for me, we made some capital investments, including like the Hilliard Libraries, working in partnership with the city, is going to be a behavioral health center. I think that's very important. We need more behavioral health access here. We continue, Logan Elementary, there's going to be a health clinic and expanded ECAP slots that builds upon our move to bring healthcare access closer to folks. We have a school-based health center at Rogers High School. I think that model is important, but we made operating investments on nursing, counselors, et cetera, across the board that add FTEs to really provide the supports people need. And I'll just close kind of with the highlights and lowlights. Personally, I introduced a bill, House Bill 1878, which was building on some work over the last 4 or 5 years on expanding more access to free meals for kids in schools. And to me, that was my number one priority. And we were able to add 90,000 plus students to the roles of getting free breakfast and free lunch. And I'm hopeful even more. And we can expand upon that, and over 12,000 students in Spokane County. And so that, to me, we can't talk about test scores and thriving in education if kids don't have a roof over their head or they don't have food in their belly. So like taking that off the table, truly. My next big pitch on that, as we get access to, is to make sure that we're providing nutritious meals, scratch and modified scratch cooking. We're putting kitchens back in schools, et cetera. And then something that popped up at our town hall, which I think was great, was some of our college students, there's a lot of hunger insecurity for our 2-year and 4-year college students, and they asked me to put that on the radar, so I'll be looking at that. So those are a couple things. Disappointments, you all saw, I fought really hard with my caucus. We wanted to do something for our frontline workers, particularly our nurses. At the end of the day, the bill moved out of the House, was not able to move out of the Senate to look at staffing ratios and look at staffing plans, meal and rest breaks, things that I think our frontline workers deserve. We'll continue the work there. We did not move that forward. It moved out of the House, but unfortunately didn't move out of the Senate. The other one, which is a little bit of inside baseball, but was important, our staff for years has said, hey, you're putting our values about working families and labor out there. What about the folks who work in our legislative? They were prohibited. They were a public sector workforce that were not allowed to unionize. So I sponsored a bill and to allow our legislative staff to unionize. It wasn't exactly the bill that I started out with, but it has a date certain when those public sector employees will be able to have the rights as so many other students. So that is kind of inside baseball, but I think with my third legislative district friends and Democrats, I thought it was worth mentioning. So 3 minutes to spare, David, and I didn't even sing the song "Don't You Forget About Me," which would have been horrible for everybody and been on YouTube and probably would have lost me an election. So.
Yeah, discretion is the better part of valor, Representative Riccelli, Marcus. I would like to just ask in the 3 minutes that we've got left, both Tim and Marcus, how much different is next year's long session? How much difference does that make? Is it a huge difference to have, what is it? Is it 40 extra days? It goes from 60 to 100? Is that right?
105.
And what are the 105? What are the prospects for major legislation coming out next year through the long session?
Well, let me start because I think it's wholly appropriate for what our legislative districts and the film tax credit. Thank you, Brian. Yes, I worked on that. I was awesome with the creative community. Look, with inflation and other things, like the biggest priority right now is, I want to look towards session, but that session looks very different if we don't hold the gavel in either chamber. And elections have consequences, and we have to maintain our majority. And so we have battleground districts all across our state. So I think it looks very different, but it would look, the length won't matter if we don't have the gavel. And that's not good for the people of Washington. So I'll let Tim, as process-wise, we can get into that. But I think all eyes should be focused on November. We have over 10 members retiring or leaving in the House. We have swing seats that are all across our state that we have to protect. So that's my focus.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Marcus. As Marcus said, campaigns, elections have consequences, and holding the majority, which the Democrats have held since the 2018 session, Democratic governor and democratically controlled House and Senate. We have to maintain that in order to make advances. I think the economic circumstances and the pandemic recovery are going to dictate what policies and budget interests we have to focus on for the 2023 session if we're fortunate enough to return and to have the majority. There's always a lot of undone things, and I think that the results of this upcoming election are going to, regardless of whether we maintain the majority or not, are going to be dictated by what folks interpret the mood of the electorate to be, things that can move, things that don't jeopardize the majority in the future. I can't land on anything specific, but it will be much easier to have a discerning eye when we have 45 more days. This was, we basically packed 15 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag this year, and it'd be nice to have a little bit of time to have some more discernment over what we're working on.
Thank you, Representative Ormsby. Without objection, this meeting of the 3rd Legislative District Precinct Committee officers is adjourned, and I now call to order the Legislative District Caucus for the 3rd Legislative District for the purpose of electing delegates to the state convention. From a quorum perspective, we have 25 voting members, 25 elected and appointed precinct committee officers present, based on the roll call that was taken off of Zoom logins as precinct committee officers arrived. And proposed rules for this particular meeting were distributed in advance. Major features of the proposed rules are that the meeting shall be called to order at 10 o'clock today. Voting members are the elected and appointed precinct committee officers. The purpose of the meeting is to elect up to 21 delegates and 11 alternates to the state convention, which will be held in Tacoma, Washington on June 25th. Principal nuance or new item is that delegates may choose to attend virtually via Zoom, as opposed to in prior conventions they had to appear in person. The proposed rules contemplate that delegates would be elected through unique voter identification numbers. The state party has indicated that if there are fewer candidates than the maximum, elections can occur by voice vote of the members. And if there is not a competitive election, the opinion of your chair is that there would be no need for delegate candidates to talk about themselves, because if they would, if there's not a competitive election, there's no choices. We would simply be electing all those who were candidates. At this point, I would entertain a motion to adopt the proposed rules for the Legislative District Caucus as previously distributed.
So moved.
Moved by Rick Galloway. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, I heard from Jean Brake. Any discussion about the proposed rules? All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. The proposed rules have been adopted. At this point, we had 4 delegate self-nominations that appeared through last night. They are Bill Foreman, Precinct Committee Officer, Steve Kirby, Precinct Committee Officer, Althea Weber, Precinct Committee Officer, and Emily Menchu, voter residing in the 3rd Legislative District. We have the ability, if everybody who was initially on this call chooses to be a delegate, everybody on this call has the ability to self-nominate. We still will not hit the maximum cap. So with permission, I'm going to poll the body and ask whether you would like to have your name put into nomination. And if you are elected a delegate, would you prefer to attend virtually or in person? So if everybody could take themselves temporarily off mute, I'm just going to go down the list and ask you if you would like to have your name placed in nomination. And if you do, will you be attending virtually? If you say no to virtually, then you're going to be, and you wish to be nominated, you will then be responsible for being in Tacoma on June 25th. So the default option, if you're self-nominating this morning, is a virtual attendance. You will simply have to log into a Zoom. And so that's how I'm going to approach it. And Mark Gibeon, would you like to be a delegate candidate?
David, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead with questions.
The question is, if you say virtual today, but you change your mind, how's that possible, or is it possible?
Virtual delegates can always choose to show up in person, but if you say in person today and you do not change your mind by April 1st, you may not be a virtual delegate. So your safe choice is to say virtual.
Okay.
You can always show up in person if you're a virtual delegate, but you cannot be an in-person switching to virtual.
Okay, thanks.
So
for
Mark, would you, yep, a great question. Thank you for asking it. Mark, would you like to be a delegate?
I having heard the discussion, yes, I'd be happy to be a virtual delegate.
Okay. Rick Galloway, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Virtual.
Virtual? Okay. Gene Brake, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, I would, and virtual.
Okay. Denny Delwo, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, and virtual.
Excellent. Karen Mobley, would you like to run for delegate?
No, thank you, David. I will be in the midst of my cancer treatment at that time and feel like I would be irresponsible to say yes.
Thank you, Karen, for that response. Brian McClatchy, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, virtual, please.
Ashley Schultz, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, please, virtually.
Virtual? Okay.
Correct. Thank you.
Elliot, would you like to run for delegate?
Virtually, yes.
Excellent. Adana, would you like to run for delegate? You're on mute, Adana.
Yes,
And would you like the virtual option?
virtual, please.
Okay. Bill Foreman, you're already a delegate candidate. Blair, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, virtually, please.
Excellent choice. Mandy, would you like to run for delegate?
No, thank you.
Excellent choice. Aaron Georgian, would you like to run for delegate?
No, thank you.
Excellent choice. And Mary Winkus, would you like to run for delegate?
Yes, virtual.
Okay, so in addition to Steve Kirby, Emily Menchu, Althea Weber, and Bill Foreman, who self-nominated, we have Blair Anudson, Gene Brake, Denny Delwo, Elliot Fabric, Rick Galloway. Kathy, did I call on you? Kathy Gunderson? I think Kathy might have left the meeting. Brian McClatchy, Ashley Schultz, Mary Winkus, Adana Yus, and Mark Gibeon. Did everyone who have an interest in running for delegate, have I said your name in the last 1 minute? So we had 10 self-nominations from this morning, 4 self-nominations through last night for a total of 14 delegates. The chair would entertain a motion for all who have been nominated to be elected by acclamation as delegates from the 3rd LD to the state convention.
David, I move that we vote by acclamation to nominate all self-nominated today and all those who nominated advance to be delegates to the state convention. It's Jack Donahue.
Thank you, Jack. Is there a second?
Second, Karen Mobley.
Thank you, Karen. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of electing the 14 named individuals as delegates from the 3rd Legislative District to the state convention, take yourselves off mute and say the word aye.
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 All
Aye.
opposed, take yourself off mute and say the word no. The motion has been agreed to, and we have elected our delegates to the state convention. Congratulations to all our delegates and for also the many people on the call who are automatic delegates. There being no further business to being brought before the Legislative District Caucus, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn the Legislative District Caucus.
So moved. So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Marcus Riccielli, 3300.
All those in favor of adjourning the Legislative District Caucus, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Thank you for your time this morning and enjoy the rest of your day. The caucus is adjourned.
Thank you,
Thank you,
David.
David, for running an excellent meeting.
Okay, for all your work.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Those of you who are former members of the 6th that are interested in attending the first reorganized, if you will, redistricted 6th LD meeting, I think I gave you all a courtesy invitation. You're welcome to join that, as well as our caucus, which will begin at 1 p.m. If you have not received that, please reach out to me and I'll provide it to you too. This is Jack Donahue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.